Hello, my name is Gil Penalosa, and this is Cities for Everyone, the webinar. Every other Tuesday, I invite fascinating people from around the world to share experiences and knowledge that will help us create affordable, equitable, and sustainable cities. I was born in Bogota, Colombia, where as commissioner, I led the design and construction of over 200 parks and took a small program called Ciclovia, Open Streets, and increased it to over 120 kilometers, 75 miles of car-free streets every Sunday and holiday, where more than 1 million people walk, bike, run, shop, enjoying the presence of each other. 17 years ago, I created 880 Cities, a non-profit organization based in Toronto, Canada, where I live. Last year, I ran for mayor and came second with 100,000 votes. My aim was to change the conversation in creating a Toronto for everyone. I've been fortunate to have worked in over 350 cities in all continents, sharing and learning. Based on all experiences, I developed master classes and keynotes customized to each city. But Cities for Everyone, the webinar, is a way of giving back. It's always free and hopefully always interesting. Please invite others to join us every other Tuesday, anyone who cares about cities and people, equity and sustainability, about all living older, healthier, and happier. Hello, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. My name is Gil Penalosa, and I want to welcome you to Cities for Everyone, the webinar. Today, we have a fascinating topic, Medellin and its transformation. As a case study, its architecture, its urbanism, its planning. For many years, Medellin was known as the world's drug capital, where Pablo Escobar and the criminals were leading their operations. And Medellin was transformed into an urban innovator. Towards the late 1990s, Bogota began the transformation of the capital in Colombia. With Antanas Mocus as mayor, I worked for him. I was his commissioner, and that's where I led hundreds of parks and open streets and so on. And afterwards, one of my brothers became mayor, Enrique, and he created a network of BRTs, bus rapid transit, as well as building schools in the poorest areas of the city, magnificent places with swimming pools and auditoriums, and also some mega libraries. And Medellin saw what was happening, and as I say, it's not copying. Every city is different, every neighborhood is different, every street. So I said, don't copy and paste like on the computer, but adapt and do whatever you think. And Medellin began, and over the last 25 years, Medellin was also innovating things such as escalators to the poorest areas in the hills of Medellin, trying to create some boundaries also so that the sprawl would stop, doing a magnificent plan along the river on how to densify, how to create communities for everyone. And today, we have someone that was right in the heart of this transformation and continues to lead from the academic point of view. We have Professor Jorge Pérez Jaramillo. He's gonna share some of his experiences. He has a couple of short videos, and then he's gonna do a presentation. And I hope that you all enjoy it, because this is a fascinating transformation with lots of examples for any city, anywhere. Thank you. So Jorge, welcome. I'm very glad that you accepted the invitation, and we got hundreds of people from all over the world. They are here eager to listen to your presentation.
Yes, thank you, Gil. Yeah, I'm an architect. I've been living all my life here, and I have had the chance to participate in many different roles along the years in the process of Medellin. In the beginning of my career, I was a young professor. Then I became very, very young, the dean of the School of Architecture. And through my role and my generation inside School of Architecture, we became members and of the process of evolution of Medellin during the 19th and the recent decades. Medellin, as you all know, is a good reference to understand the complexity of urbanization in the 20th century and today, especially because of its highly complex dynamics of urban expansion with informality and precariousness, which is a common condition in the global south. And from the 70s onwards, its progressive impoverishment and economic informality after a period of certain splendor from the 50s and 60s, added to the lack of local democracy with growing illegality and smuggling in the region, largely due to the geostrategic location of our region, which is near the Darien Forest, close to the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, in a framework that was favorable for the development of criminal organizations associated with global drug trafficking networks and later with terrorism under the power of Pablo Escobar. That, as you might know, is one of the worst terrorists ever seen in the world. Medellin lived through an extreme crisis with the highest rates of violence, terror, and social conflict you can ever imagine, which reached its peak in the late 80s and the beginning of the 90s. I might remember that in 1991, Medellin had a rate of 400,000 homicides. 400 homicides per 100,000 people in 1 year, which is probably the highest rate ever for a city, when simultaneously profound democratic changes took place in the country. I might say that for Colombia, the end of the 80s and the beginning of the 90s was a very important moment of history, because we have not only the problems of terrorism and violence, but also a new constitution and the emergence of the new local democratic movement that provided us the opportunity to have popular election of mayors and governors in 1988, and then a new political constitution in 1991, which is a very democratic and progressive constitution that allowed the cities to become drivers of change in Colombia. With Jill, we shared the experiences of Bogota in the 90s and then in Medellin, and we have had this process of change. The new constitution allowed the city of Medellin to undertake a process of broad social dialogue and construction of the new democracy with institutions, policies, some new plans, and agreed upon all the society with huge social participation and dialogue, which created a kind of path with relative coherence and continuity, and political continuity with relative coherence and political continuity for the next decade. So I think the city shows, through the support of participatory planning, urbanism, and the development of policies and works that will build public life, the capacity of a city to overcome its work crisis and any political difficulties. So I will say that Medellin became a kind of lab for experimentation and innovative plans, policies, and projects with the support of our local tradition. So to start the presentation, I will show you a video that we prepared for the Seoul Biennale some years before that shows the geography and the condition of the urban form of Medellin, and will, in just few minutes, shows you most of the main projects that the city has developed to create public life and to create inclusive development for the society. So please, Gil, you can start showing the first video. Thank you. I will speak along the video's presentation. So as I was saying, during the critical times, we have very segregated society, a very...
Now, Jorge, do you see the full screen now?
Yeah. Yeah, we're seeing it. Great. Yeah, so as I was telling you, this video shows you the site, the fantastic and marvelous Andean valley among the mountains of Medellin. The landscape, our fantastic biodiversity, beautiful mountains. Medellin is 1,005 meters above the sea level, in a highly rich valley with water, forests, fauna, and fantastic biodiversity. But in the middle of this beautiful landscape, we have a very complex, very string-dense city that you will see along the presentation. So you will see how we have experimented with urbanism, with infrastructures to rebuild the city after the crisis of the 80s at the beginning of the 90s. We have managed to create policies for inclusion, urbanism and planning to create a more integrated society. And we have learned how the power of urbanism, the power of architecture, creating places for the people, creating public spaces, public facilities, public policies, can transform even the worst crisis and the more complex society into a viable. Still, people is asking to have low volume of the music, of the video, please.
Yeah, I'm trying to see how.
Great. Yeah. So as I was saying,
Yeah, it was very hard to hear. So if you think there is something important to repeat, please, because it was very hard to hear.
Yeah, you can make a pause for a moment, and then I can repeat some statements, and then continue. So,
Yeah, but we remember that we will be done like in 20 minutes to allow people to ask questions.
Okay, so in the end, I can repeat it. Yeah, so what we are looking now is the city planning structure, how the cities around the river, the Aburrá River that comes from the south to the north along the valley, which is a very narrow valley, full of streams and full of water. So the process of the city now is how can you create through structural planning and to the creation of community processes, the transformation of this landscape into a more inclusive community. Using greening, using landscaping, using new infrastructures to create a city which is compact, less dense, more inclusive in general. This blue area is planned to be the transformation of the river area into a regenerative development with green parks, but also with green infrastructures, and also a more dense and compact city with increasingly development of affordable and social housing inside the city. The connectivity with the ecological system, trying to create a more green infrastructure, transforming the traditional city for cars and the traditional city of highway and mobility infrastructures into a city of bike lanes, pedestrian ways, new parks, integrated to the mobility system into a kind of multimodal, affordable city is the challenge we're facing. If you look at this image, you can see the connectivity with the ecology of the mountains and the river inside. And these kind of projects, which are the transformation of conventional infrastructures into community centers named UVAs, is one of the expressions of that innovative projects that we have created to develop inclusive policies for the people. This is the power of urbanism together with social policies to create community life. And we have understood that infrastructures like the cable cars or these kind of buildings are more than infrastructures, are mainly social assets to create community life and to create and to transform the way of people, of the people relations, of the people community conflicts into another way of life. So I think that Medellin expresses through this information how can a community, even in the worst conditions, can overcome its difficulties. And it is through building democratic projects, democratic participatory plans, but also increasingly creating policies for inclusion, policies to avoid segregation and to avoid exclusion. We have learned a lot from that. We have a long way to go, but we have been learning how the transformation of the tradition of cities into more inclusive places to live, it's a very, very powerful tool today to create future. So Medellin expresses this idea with the support of our local academic and economic and cultural sectors to create a community that is more engaged and more integrated into the process of superation of overcoming crises and difficulties. So this project shows you how we were able, along the last 8 years, to create a different conception of the city, transforming the traditional train lines, highways, into places for life, places to live with the community's new public spaces. The next video, which is shorter, shows you the River Parks project recently built in its first phase. It is a master plan that is built along the whole city, more than 17 kilometers long strategic interventions with new urban redevelopment areas with more than 120,000 new homes, and also the creation of this linear system of public spaces that creates a more connected, a more integrated, and a more inclusive city as a whole. So then, with this presentation, with this introduction, you can understand not only the condition of the geography, but also the condition of the society. How a society that was so violent, so segregated, so conflicted, can become a more inclusive and peaceful community. We have a long way to go. We still face many challenges and many difficulties, but it is true that the city has been able to show a path, to show a way to create a more inclusive society that could be replicated in many places of the world. When we travel, like Jill has done a lot, you realize that there are many cities in the global south that needs the challenge, the opportunity to have a strong leadership with shared vision, collective vision to overcome difficulties and to become a beautiful city. So now we can use the presentation that I have prepared, which is this, that all talks about the regeneration of Medellin in a small presentation of the process. As you see here, this is the place where the Civic Hall and the River Parks project have been under construction along the last decade. And you see the continuity and the power of planning. Next, please. Because one of the things we have learned is that we have, through planning and through the a capacity of governments to create policies to transform the sites and the places. This is very important for me now, to understand our place in the world, to understand the planet and the geography and the natural condition of the place. Medellin is located in the northwest side of South America, close to the Darien forest, besides the oceans, Atlantic and Pacific Oceans, in the end of the Andes Mountains, in the middle of the valley of the mountains, at an altitude of 1,500 meters above the sea level. Next, please. And you see how this valley is a body of water. Next, please. You see this master planning of the river basin, and you see that the city is in the middle of a very complex water system. So one thing that we are realizing is that we must reconcile our cities with the river. And this is the way we plan it. We use the master planning as a methodology, as a tool to understand the relation between the city spaces and the geography, between nature and the ecological system, to create a more sustainable city. Next. So we use multi-scale planning, both in the local and in the metropolitan and in the regional level, to develop the transition of the city. One of our challenges in the Global South is the highly fast evolution of our cities. If you look at these maps from the 19th century until now, you can see that the process of evolution of Medellin is extremely high, extremely fast, and the capacity of planning and the public policies to respond to these questions is really, really, really challenging. Next. So what we have done is to combine social dialogue with the creation of democratic processes and the use of planning and technical tools to create a more inclusive society. This is what we have been doing for many, many years now, and we are until now, and we have been fighting this because this is the expansion, the sprawl of the city towards the mountains, destroying our ecological system and our biodiversity on the mountains. So we have been trying to stop this, to preserve and protect the mountains, to protect the water basins, and to continue growing the city into a dense, compact city inside. Next, please. And we see that along the years in these pictures, we have been pressing all these borders of these mountains, all these beautiful sites. So the strategy now is to create a circumvent garden on the borders of the city and to increasingly develop the city inside along the river areas. Next, please. And the idea is that the River Parks project is a strategic one, a strategic thing to create an environment of urban redevelopment inside. Next. Next, please. So as you have been looking along the years, we have somehow invented the use of cable cars as a transportation infrastructure to connect the borders and the peripheral areas into the city. So now the idea is to include the river as a strategic objective. We have to create a more compact city, as I've been saying along the presentation, and this is the synthesis of the conceptual plan for Medellin and the future. Next. Next, please. So if you see this model, you see how the river in yellow color will become the place where most of the energy of the redevelopment of the city must come. The transformation of these car-centric development areas of the 60s, 70s, and 80s into a place for life, a place for public life, greening the city and creating a more inclusive environment. Next, please. So we created a strategic planning process that included the master planning of the river project through an international competition with the participation of more than 57 teams from the world. And we created this transformation that you will see that is only the process of the last 40 years of the river area. Next. Next, please. If you see this area is the place where the government, the civic hall is located, and you will see through the images the evolution through urbanism, architecture, and transformation of planning to evolve into a more inclusive area, a more green area, a more inclusive place. Next. This was a master planning that we developed in the end of the 90s. And along the years, we have continued to develop the project. And you can see how the creation of city places, public spaces, green areas have transformed this area into a better place to live. So this is the complementation of the processes of intervention of the neighborhoods and the traditional barrios, where the completeness of new infrastructure has become a very powerful way of change. Next. So the idea is how a city that prioritizes the right agenda to create public places to live, complementing public policies, good government, long-term vision, with continuity, with the participation of the community, can overcome even the worst critical moments. So Medellin is an example of that. It is not a perfect example of anything, but shows that the power, as I have said, the power of planning, the power of participation, the power of strong leadership can transform the city life. Next. If you look at these images, you see how many projects have been developed in this area along the last 30 years. So you see how many transformations you can achieve, even in a city which is not as rich as wealth as many other cities in the world, but we can create conditions for transformation even in these difficulties. Next. You can follow the images one to the other from now on. This was the winning proposal for the international competition of the River Parks project, which proposes to transform the river basin into a system of parks that goes along the city from north to south, connecting all the places. So this is the master plan, the general plan of the city that includes the River Parks project. And in the blue areas, the transformation of these places in white, where you didn't have high densities, but where you should have them. Because if you redevelop these white areas, you will have a more dense, compact, integrated city with more competitiveness and more capacity. This is the proposal. Along the river transformation to create 120,000 new affordable and mid-class homes to create a more inclusive society. So the transformation of public spaces, the transformation of the pyramid of mobility to create a more walkable, bikeable city with high dense buildings to create public spaces and public facilities is the challenge we are facing now. This is challenging not only because of social factors, but also in terms of environment and in terms of climate change challenges. We have to create a more compact society that is able to share the space and to create these inclusive policies that promotes better quality of life, better conditions for all, and probably that will help us to be a more peaceful society in the next years. So this model of urbanism with more parks, with more green areas, with more collective places, has been a lesson that after the COVID pandemic, we have learned to understand. If you see at this picture, I like it very much because you see in the end of the picture the towers on top of the mountains. We want to stop that, and we want to create an environment that is more related to the river, with more related to the public transportation system in the areas besides the river when you can walk and bike easier. So we will be a more integrated society if we are able to transform this area. Next. And the environment, the type of environment we create through the River Parks project is a place for more integrated communities, sharing the spaces, sharing their lives, connecting to new activities, and understanding that it is possible to have affordable homes in the best places of the city. If you see, this was the proposal of the winning proposal for the competition. On the left, the existing condition, and on the right, the proposal to have a botanic garden along the river areas. So the master planning was developed, and along the last years, we have been able to build the first phase besides the civic hall area. Next. Next, please. And this is very important because it shows you the section when the cars are below and the people, it's over. So this is the priority, to create a city that is for the people and not for the machines. We need the cars, we need the transportation systems, but we need the transportation systems to connect and to integrate the communities. So having pedestrian bridges, having walkable and bikeable places along the city is a priority now. And River Park shows that priority as the main essence of the construction of the city. Next. But also greening the place. The ecological connectivity that integrates the inner city to the mountains is very powerful. Next, please. Next. So this is what we have been achieving. A city that is for the people, for living, not only for working, not only for having machines and functionalities. We have the challenge to create a more integrated society with proximity urbanism that integrates the barriers through public spaces and integrates the community through their own lives. We have learned a lot. It's been a long time of experimentation, a long time of working with theoretical approaches into creation of real projects with the right budgets and with the capacity of the city to transform its reality. And it's been a very challenging process of discussions, of dialogue with the communities, with participatory processes, but also learning a lot from politicians, from economic leaders, with support of the communities to create agreements, to create connections between the decisions, the leaders of that takes all those decisions, and the community that uses and creates actually the real city life. So for the first time, we have been having bridges to connect both cities, the east and west areas, and to integrate the city through public spaces like these. We met with Jill some years ago discussing about World Urban Parks Association, an international organization that promotes parks. And I was telling him that one of the challenges we face in the Global South is that most of the cities of the world are not thinking enough about the priority of new parks and new public areas as a main asset for the cities. And we have been working on that. And I think it's a fantastic result to have a city that is able to prioritize simultaneously to urban priorities, the creation of these kind of places, of these kind of sites for the communities and the people. Next. So you connect neighborhoods to civic areas, and this is the final stage of the presentation. So what I wanted to share in this short period of time is the experience, some of the experience of Medellin transforming its conflictive type of life of the past into a very inspiring and powerful condition today that, even though, as I have said, has many challenges, offers us many opportunities to dream towards the future. So now, Jill, we can have the time to discussion. Thank you.
Jorge, also, but so some people were making comments on the issue of the comuna. You did not include the comunas and the cable cars, the escalators to the comunas. How do you make those links? Why don't you talk to us a little bit about that? The poorest areas of the cities that were up in the mountains and were isolated, and then you develop these amazing libraries and projects on the poorest areas.
Well, right, yeah. In the beginning of the first video, you had a lot of images about the process of intervention and the peripheral areas of Medellin. Yeah, I think the meaningful thing of the process of the 90s and the beginning of this century was that how our city was able to prioritize the interventions needed to complete those informal settlements with a lot of poverty, with a lot of exclusions, and with a lot of segregated communities. So we used infrastructures like cable cars. We used infrastructures like public facilities for culture, for education, for recreation, and so on, as a tool to create a more inclusive and integrated community. So we learned a lot from that, and we still have a lot of challenges in those areas. It's not easy to overcome the challenges of the past, but we needed to combine these tactical interventions with strategic interventions for the whole city. So the combination of low-scale intervention and big-scale creations like the public areas of the river are needed to transform the whole society.
Exactly. I think that we need hardware, but we also need software. It's a combination of both infrastructure and program.